Hello, my name is Mary Beth Jacobs, and I am going to talk to you about long tail cast on stitch anatomy and how to make it to gauge. Okay, so long tail cast on is usually one of the first things that a knitter would learn, sometimes called a basic cast on, and maybe those two things, the excitement of learning how to actually knit, the knit stitch, the purl stitch, doing all these other interesting things. Usually people don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about long tail cast on, but there is actually quite a bit of stitch anatomy going on with this cast on. And the other issue is that a lot of knitters actually struggle with making a long tail cast on that is to gauge. Most of the time, they'll make it with a really tight binding bottom, one that doesn't feel good when it's on your wrist. It doesn't feel good at the top of the sock. It won't pull around your head for a hat. So what I would like to do is have you understand the stitch anatomy and then show you how to make a properly gauged long tail cast on. Okay. I'm starting off with some worsted wool, and this is special because I have spit and spliced it. You can see that. My tail, my long tail, is purple, and my working yarn is blue. Okay. And so I'm going to do that so you can see the stitch anatomy and how my working yarn and my long tail behave. I'm choosing a needle that is appropriate gauge for this, and I'm going to switch my camera so that you can see my hands. What I would propose to you is that the working yarn and the long tail, once they become a slip knot and they begin making this cast on, they actually behave as if they are two separate yarn sources. So I'm going to go ahead and make my slip knot. I'm going to place it so that my color change is as close to the middle of the stitch as I can. I have my working yarn to the back and let's try to, my long tail toward the front. I'm going to make some of the long tail cast on. Got my sling with my pointer finger with the working yarn and my thumb with the long tail. And I'm just going to go ahead and make some of these stitches. I have a video showing the mechanics in depth on how to make this cast on. So I would refer you to there if this is too fast. Because right now I just want to go over the stitch anatomy of what is happening. Okay. And if you notice, even in the motion, my long tail and my working yarn act as two separate yarn sources. They're doing different things. They're in different positions. Okay. So let's analyze what has happened here. So you can see my stitches are blue, like the working yarn, and my long tail is purple. And that is this smooth part underneath. My stitches are properly hitched, meaning that they travel, you can see it on the end one best, they travel with the front leg, starting toward the right, going over the needle, toward the left behind, okay? They're not twisted. You can see from the back, the blue, the working yarn, is coming around from the front. It's going under and traveling under the needle up through here to make the next stitch. It's traveling under, and at each point it's cinched by that blue, by the purple yarn tail. This cast on is doing two things. Obviously it's making stitches, so that's the first thing. But then the second thing it's doing, it is simulating a structure. It's providing a structure that simulates what would happen if I had a field of knitted material below it. I can take my working yarn and I can just twirl it. And when I look at those twirls, they look like stitches in a proper sense. The front of it, the front leg is starting from the bottom right, traveling over back to the left. They look properly hitched. If I were to knit into this, it would disintegrate because there is no structure underneath it. Okay, so you absolutely must have some sort of structure underneath these stitches, either in the form of knitted fabric or in the form of some sort of a cast on edge. Okay. Another thing I would draw your attention to is that, as I had mentioned before, these two yarns act as if they're separate yarn sources. So the blue working yarn is doing something completely different than the purple. I would propose to you as well that they have their own gauges. The blue yarn, the working yarn, is twirling around the needle, so its gauge is set by needle size. The purple yarn, the long tail, which is providing the structure, has no affiliation whatsoever with this needle. It never touches the needle. It never goes around the needle. It simply hangs below the needle, providing a structure. It has its own gauge, and clearly this gauge is not determined in any way, shape, or form by the needle size I chose, okay, because it doesn't even touch the needle. It hangs below. So one common fix you will hear, oh, just go up needle size. And I would propose that that is a terrible idea because you have only changed the gauge of your blue yarn, a yarn that you never had to worry about tensioning at all because it was made to gauge. It was made to gauge by your choice of needle size, and it will be at the same gauge as the rest of your material. And choosing a different needle size does nothing whatsoever to address the gauge of this long tail structure underneath. Okay. So if you are having a problem with gauge, you are having a problem with this purple bit, the part you actually get to control. Okay. So let's go through and discuss how we properly tension this purple yarn. Okay. So I'm going to pull this apart. One of the first things as a knitter you need to work on is not just your muscle memory of your hands, but you're putting good pictures into your mind. Okay. And so you need to learn how to appropriately gauge by vision. I don't know who these people are anymore, but they make a great ruler. So I'll just cover up their first name. I'm holding this ruler up against my needle so you can get an idea of what an inch looks like. Okay, so this is what an inch looks like. I'm working with a yarn that wants to be at about 5 stitches per inch if I'm going to be within the ball band. Okay, and so what I have is I just want to get an idea. So I'm gonna have a stitch about here, so that'd be 1, a stitch about here, that'd be 2, a stitch about here, 3, maybe 4, and then 5, right? And that would put me at roughly 5 stitches per inch. So I'm just trying to get an idea of where those would lie on there. They're definitely not going to be all bunched together. There's going to be space, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put these on my needle at that gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and reuse my crinkly yarn, make my slip knot, working yarn toward the back, and my long tail toward the front. And I'm going to go ahead and make my first stitch. And I'm going to say, if I put it about there, that's going to be a good space. Just trying to remember what my 1 inch looks like. So I'm going to trap it there. And I'm going to ever so gently tighten this down. Now, when I tighten this down, I want to make sure I'm not pulling. So you see, if I pull, you see how these 2 stitches start to come in closer at the base? This is going to result in a tight binding edge because I have made this long tail piece too short. So I'm going to undo that and I'm going to try it again where I don't do that. So I'm going to set them on my needle at gauge and I'm going to try to tighten this down so that they stay fairly parallel. Okay, so I think that's probably pretty decent. Let me try my next one. And again, I have this mental picture that if I'm doing it at about there, that'll probably get me close to 5 stitches. So I'm going to trap this with my pointer finger on my right hand, and I'm going to start slacking that down. Now, to a lot of people, this probably looks monster big, but it's actually to gauge. Let me do my next one. I'll do a few extra at about this same interval. It's kind of hard to do it slow when you're used to doing it fast. So bear with me while I do a few fast, because this is what I'm more used to. And you will work with speed as you do it more. But you can see the general idea is that I'm making my stitch on my needle and then I'm snugging it down, paying attention to what that long tail is doing and not pulling it too tight. Okay, so here I have my stitches. And I've made a few. So let's use our ruler and measure out an inch and see where we're at. And I would propose it's best to measure from the bottom if you can, because that is where the tension issues arise. So here I have 2, 4, 5, and they're all within that 1 inch, roughly. I can move it over here and see I'm about the same, which I am, 2, 4, 5. Doing this by getting a mental picture, placing my stitches on the needle as I work them, and then taking very good care when I snug up to leave slack in this long tail is how I'm going to cast on to gauge. And you can see here, this moves, it's not binding, but it also doesn't sit poorly. It doesn't look sloppy. It looks nice and neat, and it'll be at the same gauge as the rest of my material. So I would propose to you to just practice that and work on getting a mental image about what an inch looks like. And then when you cast on, to put the stitch on at about what looks like the right interval, and then take good care as you're snugging up to keep that bottom edge nice and square, keep those stitches nice and perpendicular to the long tail so that everything looks nice and square and flat. And then when you pull it off, it'll be nice and evenly tensioned. It will not be sloppy. It will not be overly large. You will have not introduced any distortion into those stitches. They'll be to gauge, and you will have adjusted the gauge of that long tail edge. So I hope that helps and that you use your long tail in a lot of projects and have good success. Have a good day. Bye-bye.